I never thought someone could see past my walls until she pulled me close and everything I'd hidden began to crumble. I remember the first time I noticed her. It wasn't dramatic, no cinematic entrance or sudden, life-changing moment. She simply walked into the cafe where I usually spend my Saturday mornings, a book tucked under her arm, and the world seemed to shift just slightly around her. The air felt warmer, somehow, or maybe it was just the calm gravity she carried with her. She was older than me, that much was obvious, not just in years, but in the quiet confidence that came from experience. Yet there was softness too, a vulnerability she didn't try to hide, the kind that makes you want to lean closer, not out of lust, but out of care. Her hair caught the sunlight, a gentle mix of chestnut and silver strands that framed her face in a way that made her look effortlessly elegant. And her eyes, they weren't the kind that scan a room for attention. They were the kind that saw people, really saw them. I was sitting at my usual corner table, laptop open, half listening to the music in my earbuds, when she asked a question. It was simple, almost casual, something about the cafe's new pastry selection, but there was an undertone of curiosity, of interest that seemed directed at more than the pastry. I looked up, startled by the directness, and for a moment I couldn't speak. She smiled, patient and warm, and the nervous tightness in my chest began to loosen, just slightly. Her voice was soft, steady, a subtle melody that contrasted with the clatter of coffee cups and the low hum of conversation. As we talked, I noticed the little things. The way she tucked a stray hair behind her ear, how her fingers lingered over the book she carried, the quiet cadence of her laughter that made my own smile come easier than it had in months. Every gesture felt natural, unforced, yet somehow magnetic. It wasn't just her presence that unsettled me. It was the way she seemed to notice me. Not just the surface, not my hair or the way I dressed, but something deeper. The way I hesitated before speaking about myself, the careful walls I had built around my emotions, the subtle tension I carried in my shoulders. She didn't push, didn't pry. She just acknowledged it, with a tilt of her head, a soft question, or a pause that let me feel seen without fear of judgment. When she finally left, slipping out of the cafe as quietly as she'd arrived, I realized I had been holding my breath. The empty table suddenly felt colder, quieter, as if the warmth she left behind hadn't dissipated at all. I didn't know her name yet. I didn't know if I would ever see her again. But somehow, in that fleeting half hour of conversation, something had shifted inside me. I wanted to see her again, not just out of curiosity, but because for the first time in a long while, I felt the quiet stirrings of connection. And that was the day my walls first noticed a crack. After that first encounter in the cafe, seeing her became something I started unconsciously looking forward to. I found myself hoping she would be there, even though I had no real reason to believe she would return. And then, as if the universe had been listening, I started noticing her more often. In the corner of a bookstore, browsing through worn novels. At the park, leaning against the railing as she watched the ducks glide across the pond. Even at that small community gallery, where she lingered over a painting for longer than anyone else. Each meeting was quiet, almost ordinary, but in its ordinariness lay a kind of intimacy. We began exchanging casual smiles at first, small acknowledgments that slowly stretched into conversations. At first, the talks were brief, almost clipped. "Did you try the new pastry?" she would ask, and I would laugh at my own distractedness, surprised that she remembered the tiny details I didn't expect anyone to notice. But over time, the pauses between our words became comfortable. I began noticing how she listened, really listened, the way her body leaned just slightly toward mine, an unspoken invitation to share more than just words. There were small touches, too. Nothing dramatic, nothing that demanded attention, but enough to make my chest tighten pleasantly every time. She would brush a crumb off my shoulder with the back of her fingers, her touch light but deliberate. Our hands would briefly collide when passing a book or reaching for a chair, and I'd feel a spark, like a quiet current running just beneath the surface. I started noticing how her laughter had a weight to it, warm and soft, and how it settled inside me longer than it should have. I, of course, tried to pretend none of this mattered. I told myself it was nothing, just coincidence, friendliness, simple politeness. But the truth was, I was slowly, almost unwillingly, letting her in. I noticed when her eyes softened at my jokes, when she tilted her head as if she wanted to understand what I wasn't saying. I noticed the way she held her coffee cup, the curl of her fingers around it, and how even the smallest gestures seemed to ripple through me in ways I didn't understand. One afternoon, as we left the bookstore together, our shoulders brushed. A simple gesture, almost accidental, but my heart jumped. I caught a glimpse of her eyes, calm, steady, almost amused, and in that moment, the quiet realization hit me. I'd started to care. Not in a loud, consuming way, but in a subtle, insistent way that made me want to linger near her, to hear her voice, to watch her move through the world. By the time we parted that day, exchanging a casual, "see you soon," I felt a strange, unfamiliar warmth lingering in my chest. It was no longer just curiosity that drew me toward her. It was the gentle, insistent pull of familiarity, of a connection that was becoming essential in a way I hadn't expected. And I knew, quietly, that this was only the beginning of something far deeper than either of us were ready to admit. It happened on a day when I hadn't planned to see her at all. I was sitting on the park bench near the small pond, headphones dangling around my neck, staring at ripples in the water, and trying not to think too much about how exhausted I felt. The kind of exhaustion that isn't just physical. It lingers in your chest, in your thoughts, in the tightness behind your eyes. And that's when I felt her presence before I even saw her. "Hey," she said softly, her voice threading through the hum of city life and birdsong. I looked up and saw her standing there, her bag slung casually over one shoulder, the corners of her mouth lifting in a smile that felt almost like an apology for interrupting the heaviness I had been carrying alone. "Hey," I replied, trying to mask the fatigue in my voice. But she didn't just nod and move along. Instead, she walked over and sat down at the edge of the bench, leaving enough space for comfort, yet close enough to feel the warmth radiating from her. She didn't ask what was wrong. She didn't push. She simply stayed. And somehow, that presence alone made it easier to breathe. For a while, we just watched the water together. I could feel the soft brush of her coat against my arm when she shifted, and my heart responded in ways I couldn't quite name. Then almost instinctively, I began talking about work, about doubts, about the quiet fears I usually tucked away. I spoke haltingly, hesitant, unsure if I was allowed to let someone in this far. But she didn't interrupt. She didn't judge. She just tilted her head slightly, listening, eyes steady and patient, letting me spill thoughts I hadn't voiced in years. And then she did something small but monumental. Her hand brushed against mine, lingering just a moment longer than necessary, a quiet anchor against the storm of thoughts inside me. It wasn't dramatic or intentional, at least not in a way that demanded attention. It was just solid, real, and it cracked something open in me I didn't even realize was sealed. I felt a warmth, a sense of steadiness that wasn't fear or pressure, but simple presence. She didn't say anything, just gave a soft smile and waited for me to finish. And when I finally paused, words failing me, she reached up and adjusted a loose strand of hair near my temple, fingers brushing my skin lightly. My chest tightened again, but differently this time, not from anxiety or fear, but from the strange, comforting realization that I could trust her, that I wanted to trust her. By the time we left the park, walking side by side in comfortable silence, I realized my walls were no longer just standing tall. They had cracks, small, delicate, but real, cracks that she hadn't forced. She had simply shown me that I could let someone close without losing myself. And for the first time in years, I felt that strange, unsettling excitement of vulnerability, the kind that makes you simultaneously afraid and hopeful, unsure and strangely certain that someone might change everything about the way you live just by being present. It was one of those evenings where the world felt quieter than usual. The city's noises seemed softened, the streetlights casting long, amber glows on the pavement, and even the hum of passing cars felt distant. I hadn't planned to be out, just a walk to clear my head after a long day, but somehow I found myself near the bookstore where I knew she sometimes lingered. And, as if on cue, there she was crouched slightly over a stack of books, her fingers tracing the spines with gentle reverence. Seeing her there, in that soft, private light, my chest tightened in a way I could no longer ignore. She looked up, caught my gaze, and smiled. That smile, easy, unhurried, and warm, made me feel like I was being welcomed into something I didn't yet understand but desperately wanted to. We started walking together, side by side, the air between us charged with a quiet tension neither of us had yet named. We didn't need many words. The silence was comfortable, punctuated by small sounds. The scrape of her shoes against the pavement, the soft rustle of leaves in the evening breeze, the faint exhale she made when a memory must have passed through her mind. I found myself noticing everything. The gentle curve of her shoulder as she adjusted her bag, the way her hair fell against her cheek in the dim light, the subtle warmth radiating from her when our arms brushed as we passed a narrow doorway. Each touch was fleeting, yet it lingered far longer than it should, leaving my skin tingling in ways I couldn't quite name. She leaned slightly closer when she spoke, a gesture so subtle that I might have missed it if I wasn't paying attention. Her voice, soft and steady, carried an unspoken invitation, a permission to share, to be present, to be more than I usually allowed myself to be. And every time our eyes met, the world around us seemed to pause, the quiet street folding in on itself, leaving only the two of us in that fragile bubble of connection. At one point, I caught her glance drifting toward my lips, then back to my eyes, and my breath hitched in a way that startled me. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words felt heavy, unnecessary, even dangerous in their honesty. Instead, we walked on, shoulders brushing, heartbeats rising in tandem, neither of us daring to close the small distance that seemed to shrink and expand with every step. By the time we parted for the evening, the tension had thickened into something almost tangible, a quiet awareness that we were both waiting, both hesitant, both secretly longing. I felt the pull of her presence linger long after she disappeared down the street, a magnetic tug that made me realize just how much she had begun to occupy my thoughts. For the first time, I understood that this wasn't just familiarity anymore. This was more, subtle, unspoken, and undeniably real. It was a tension that begged to be acknowledged, even if we weren't yet brave enough to give a name. And I knew, with an unsettling mix of fear and anticipation, that the pull between us was only growing stronger, like the slow, inexorable tide, drawing me closer to something I didn't yet fully understand, but couldn't resist. The evening had settled into a quiet stillness, the kind that makes you hyper-aware of everything around you. The soft rustle of leaves in the breeze, the distant hum of city life, even the subtle rhythm of your own heartbeat. We were sitting on the low steps outside the small gallery, shoulders brushing in that comfortable closeness that had been growing between us over weeks. I could feel the warmth of her presence like a subtle glow, something that made my chest both lighter and heavier at the same time. We had been talking about small things, insignificant things, yet there was a weight to the silence that stretched between us, a quiet understanding of what neither of us wanted to say out loud. Then, suddenly, without warning, she leaned just slightly closer. I felt the brush of her hand against mine, and the world around me narrowed, fading until all I could feel was her warmth. She didn't ask permission. She didn't need to. Her hand slid gently along the back of my neck, the pad of her thumb brushing against the edge of my jaw, tentative yet certain. The touch was small, yet it sent an unexpected tremor through me, a mix of shock, comfort, and an unfamiliar sense of surrender. My walls, which I had built so carefully over years, felt like they were crumbling in the most beautiful way. And then she pulled me close, not hurriedly, not aggressively, but with a deliberate patience that left room for me to retreat if I wanted to. But I didn't. My chest pressed lightly against her, our shoulders touching, our arms resting against one another in a closeness I had never let anyone have. Her hair brushed against my cheek, and I could smell the faint, comforting scent of her, a mix of warmth, subtle perfume, and the calm that seemed to radiate from her very being. For the first time in as long as I could remember, I felt seen. Really seen. No expectations, no judgments, just her. Her arms held me with a quiet steadiness that was disarming in its simplicity. I could feel the rise and fall of her breath against me, a steady rhythm that seemed to echo in my own chest. I rested my hands lightly on her back, hesitant at first, then gradually letting myself be anchored by her presence. There was no rush, no need to speak. Words felt unnecessary, even intrusive compared to the weight of this moment. It was the first time I allowed myself to be vulnerable in her presence, and instead of fear, I felt an unfamiliar sense of safety. Something inside me shifted, a long-held wall giving way to a warmth I had only glimpsed in dreams. When we finally pulled back, just enough to see each other's eyes, the silence between us was full of unspoken understanding. Her smile was soft, patient, almost tender, and I realized that in this brief, gentle embrace, she had done something profound. She had pulled me close, yes, but she had also quietly broken the walls I'd spent years fortifying, leaving me open, unguarded, and utterly alive to the possibility of what we could become. After that evening on the gallery steps, something had shifted between us. The air felt heavier with unspoken words, yet lighter with a newfound closeness that neither of us could ignore. We found ourselves sitting together again, this time on a quiet bench in the park, the city lights casting a soft, golden glow around her. The warmth from our previous embrace lingered in my chest, a reminder of how fragile and exhilarating this connection had become. I hesitated at first, my fingers drumming lightly against my knees. It felt strange, unnerving, even to admit how deeply her presence had begun to affect me. But she noticed. She always noticed. Her gaze found mine, steady and patient, and the way her eyes softened made it impossible to look away. There was no judgment there, only understanding, as if she had been waiting for me to lower my walls. "I've been holding back," she said quietly, her fingers brushing the strap of her bag, "because I didn't want to assume anything or scare you away." Her words were careful, deliberate, carrying the weight of someone who had lived long enough to know the power of restraint. I swallowed hard, trying to find my own words, but the truth was raw and immediate. "I've been afraid too," I admitted, my voice low. "Not of you, but of how I feel. I've built these walls so I wouldn't have to face it, the idea that someone like you could see me, all of me." Her hand reached out slowly, brushing against mine. The touch was small but grounding, like a lifeline thrown across a gap I didn't know I'd been standing over. "You don't have to be afraid," she said softly. "Not with me." Her thumb traced light circles over the back of my hand, and I felt a warmth spreading through me that had nothing to do with the cool night air. For a long moment, we just sat like that, hands touching, shoulders close, hearts somehow synchronized without needing to speak. The silence was comfortable, full of all the words that had been too heavy to say before. Every so often, her gaze would flick to mine, a question there, a reassurance, a gentle pull asking me to let go of the last remnants of my fear. "I didn't think I could let someone in like this," I confessed, "but you make it feel easy. Safe." Her smile was quiet, almost shy, though there was strength in it too. "That's all I want," she whispered. "For us to be honest, even if it's scary." The night seemed to wrap around us, cocooning us in a private, luminous bubble. Our hands remained intertwined, fingers lightly pressing into each other, every subtle movement communicating more than words could. It was in this moment that I realized we were no longer just two people navigating proximity or polite familiarity. We were opening ourselves fully, gently, intentionally. By the time we stood to leave, the tension had dissolved into a steady warmth. We walked together in silence, our hands still loosely interlaced, the night carrying a quiet promise that whatever came next, we would face it honestly, together. For the first time, the walls I'd spent years building felt less like protection and more like barriers I was willing to leave behind. For her, for us. The evening air was soft and still, carrying the faint scent of autumn leaves and the distant hum of streetlights. We walked together down a quiet lane, neither of us speaking at first, yet the silence between us was full of understanding, unspoken affection, and the delicate thrill of something new yet familiar. Our shoulders brushed occasionally, a touch so light it could have been accidental, but every time it happened, I felt a jolt of warmth that ran straight to my chest. At one point, she slipped her hand into mine. It was effortless, natural, as though it had always belonged there. I didn't hesitate to interlace my fingers with hers, feeling the steady heat of her skin against mine. It wasn't just a touch. It was a statement, quiet, unassuming, but undeniably intimate. With every step we took together, I felt the pull of her presence deepening, a soft tether tying us closer without words. We paused near a small fountain, the water catching the glow of the street lamps in rippling reflections. She turned to me, just slightly, and I noticed the subtle curve of her lips, the gentle sparkle in her eyes, the way her hair fell across her shoulder in a way that invited me to reach out and brush it back. And I did. My fingers grazed the strands, and when our eyes met, a quiet understanding passed between us, a shared acknowledgement of everything we had been feeling, everything we had been too cautious to say. She leaned forward, resting her cheek lightly against mine. The warmth of her skin pressed softly against me, and I could feel the rise and fall of her breath as it synchronized, almost imperceptibly, with my own. The world seemed to hold its breath with us, leaving only the hum of our heartbeats and the gentle rustle of leaves. In that moment, I realized how completely I had let her in, and how completely I wanted her there. Then she pressed a soft kiss to my cheek, lingering just enough to send a ripple of warmth through me, and her hand stayed against my jaw, gentle, reassuring, grounding. It was an unspoken promise, not of grand declarations or hurried confessions, but of patience, care, and the quiet certainty of shared affection. I leaned into her touch, savoring the closeness, the simple intimacy of being near someone who had become essential in a way I never anticipated. And as we walked on, hand in hand, shoulders brushing, our footsteps echoing softly along the empty street, it felt like the beginning of something enduring. Not rushed, not forced, just two people choosing to move forward together, slowly, steadily, and with full awareness of the depth of their connection. The night wrapped around us like a warm blanket, carrying the promise of countless moments like this, small, deliberate, and full of quiet intimacy. And as we disappeared into the gentle glow of the city, I knew this. Whatever walls I had once built, whatever fears I had clung to, they no longer mattered. She had pulled me close, yes, but more importantly, she had shown me what it felt like to be truly open, truly seen, and truly loved. And in that certainty, I found a peace I hadn't known I was missing.